Okay, the reason there are no pictures is that there's not really anything you can see on the stamps that we're going to tell you about this. This is a discussion of the use of major and minor numbers in the Scott catalog. The reason I have all this information, of course, is I've been making up these thousands of pages to update the Scott International album and ran into all sorts of issues with major and minor numbers into what I put in my pages. The first question is, what is a postage stamp? And what is a catalog number? Obviously, it's a material object, usually a paper with a design intended to prepay sending a letter or some related service. Now, at the atomic level or molecular level, all stamps are different. You got a microscope powerful enough, we got an electron microscope. Every single stamp printed is different from every other stamp, but obviously, maybe only the accumulators collect at this level. They'll just take thousands and thousands of copies of the same stamp. Collecting and buying and selling of stamps is really an issue of differentiating between one stamp and another, not at the level we just discussed with the accumulator. And the number is used is an easy way to identify which different stamp it is. It should be noted that Scott does not attempt to define what a catalog number means in the introductory materials. It assumes you know what it is. Also, the people collect stamps in a variety of ways. So you have a differentiation between the specialist, the completist, and the junior collectors. Albums and catalogs come in the same sort of flavor. So a specialist would collect all varieties of a stamp, often even unlisted varieties. A completist like myself would look for all major varieties, for example. And the junior, which you find in the less expensive albums, only collects the less expensive stamps. And it should be also noted that the classic fundamentals of philately does not discuss catalog numbers in any way, shape, or form. He's telling you about the stamps, all the details of the stamps, but not what the catalog number is. So there's actually a question of what a catalog number should be. Why do we have this distinction between major and minor stamp numbers? In the Scott catalog, they say that the major numbers could have just a number or a number and an uppercase suffix, whereas minor numbers or varieties have a number and a lowercase. And the introductory materials say that there's a difference in the font style between these two listings. And the majors are large, bold, and non-italic. And the minor numbers are small, not bold, and italic. But it turns out this is not the case. And at the end of my first period of work on my pages, Scott had started putting minor number stamps with large, non-bold, and non-italic, bold and non-italic fonts. So I said, oh, Scott has decided to promote these minor numbers to major numbers. And I made several dozen pages putting in these new stamps, thinking that that's the way it works. But finally, I talked to the Scott catalog people, and they said, oh, no. If it's got a lowercase suffix, it's a minor number. It doesn't matter what the font is. And as far as I know, they have not changed the introductory materials to reflect that fact.
I just looked up Angola 7A, 8A, and 9A, and they appear, in large, bold type, right along with the other major numbers. Are you saying now that Scott says those are still minor numbers?
What Scott says, yes.
Huh. That is confusing.
They haven't been consistent about that. Sometimes the new minor numbers are small and italic, but there's a problem with editorial control there, I think. Again, Scott does not define what the difference between a major number and a minor number is in the introductory materials. In any case, numbers mean that a stamp is different from other stamps, but not for an accidental reason. So if you have damage to wear or sun, it's not a different stamp. So it's a stamp that was made different for a reason, on purpose. The only problem with that, of course, is that stamp catalogs often list errors, which are things that happened at the stamp that have nothing to do with anyone intending to do it. And as we'll see later with perforations, there's other issues with that. So a major number must be a separate design and denomination, but may have other characteristics that differentiate it from other stamps in some cases, but not all. This is the confusion we have with the use of major and minor numbers in the catalogs. What are the ways in which one stamp can differ from another? And we're assuming here that they're all from the same country. So the design and the die, we know all these die information about the British colonial stamps. There are several different dies involved there. A set will have the same design and not even just change the denomination, but they will all be similar in their styling and so on. And then you can have fly specking, and that's one of the more important ways. Things that are different design are also almost always a different major number. And then, of course, the denomination of a stamp differ. There are a whole lot of issues with the type of paper that it's on. Scott in their albums, for example, always specifies what watermark you're looking at. And almost always, when the watermark changes, it's a different major number, but not always. The color of the paper and the difference between surface colored paper and paper that's colored all the way through. The weight of the paper. Is a paper chalky, ordinary glaze? Is it granite paper? And so on and so on. And the type of the paper. Some stamps, as we know, are printed on the backs of maps or on quadrille paper. And then, of course, there's a different, is there perforation and what type and what gauge of perforation is it? Then there's the printing. What color was it printed in? You have some cases where you have the same design, but on some stamps, it's a little bit smaller or larger. The method of printing, is it engraved, is it offset, and so on. And even the quality of printing. As we'll see later, the Greek Hermes heads are differentiated by whether they were printed in Paris or Athens, and that has to do with quality. Yes.
You mentioned the Hermes heads. Let me just say something about that. The different numbers are assigned to stamps of different periods, and then it's up to you to determine, which individuals fall into those categories. Printing quality is one of the clues.
You can also distinguish stamps by whether they have varnish bars or not. This is a case of Austria. Overprints or perfins and gum. This is interesting that Scott does specifically say we will not distinguish one stamp from another on the basis of what kind of gum it has. They have some remarks about this in various places, but their claim is that they will not distinguish one stamp from another on the basis of what kind of gum it has.
They do mention gum as an identifying feature, usually in notes, alongside the stamp, but not in the actual listing.
That's often the case for example, reprints, saying that this gum is white and heavy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
One of the issues that comes with Scott is the idea of sets, and I guess most catalogs have the idea of sets, which gives them a certain amount of problem. Usually, a set is listed as a set because the stamps for the set were all issued at the same time, and usually to commemorate something specific or to be a new definitive issue. Sometimes in a set, what Scott calls a set, they will have stamps of the same denomination, but different colors, and sometimes quite different colors for the same denominations. They will include that in the set. And you will find out that this particular stamp was issued at a later time than the original set. There are quite often slight differences in the color, and they will list these as minor numbers rather than as major numbers. So the problem with sets is that, as we'll see later, if you're interested in what order stamps were issued, rather than in what Scott tells you is a set, the numbers do not reflect the postal history, the order in which things were issued. Dates, what are the rules for date specification? Some numbers and sets have just a year. Some have a range of years. Quite often, individual items in a set that has a range of years are not described in terms of which year in that range they were issued. For example, Canal Zone, 1937 to 41 postage due issue. In the album pages I had and in the original Scott catalogs, they indicated that I believe it's J29 was the one that was issued in 1941, and the others were all 1937. The current listing does not tell you that. They've lost that information. That they know that the set is that range of dates, but they won't tell you which stamp is which. Varieties are not listed in the order of date. And the rule seems to be if there's no date on a particular variety, then you should take that to mean that stamp was issued in the original, the first date of the issues for that set. I'm not sure that that's true. And in fact, I received some information that once they've changed the date for a particular variety, anything following that variety can be conceived to have the same date. But that I don't think that's true because the dates go back and forth if you look on a very complicated set. Greenland Q4 through 8 has 1937 specified as the set. But all of the issues in that area have 1937 specified in parentheses behind them. But except Q6A does not have a date on it. Why did they put the 1937 for everyone but that one? Why did they do that at all? The whole set is 1937. So it's very confusing. Also in Greenland Q1 is also peculiar because this single stamp has a range of dates specified for it. What does that mean? Did they not know? They're estimating. Were there reprints of some kind that they know about? I don't understand what that means in terms of what the date of that particular stamp was. And some numbers or sets have the month or the month and the day specified. But you have the same problems with those in terms of what's really in play there. Here's my biggest problem with the way Scott gives numbers. The King George VI had in oval sets, pictorial sets, for many, many of the colonies, have perforation changes. And not just because the larger or just small designs have different perforations, or the horizontal or vertical stamps have different perforations. So some of the sets, the first set issued, were issued at all of these various perforations. There's no standard for that. Most of them are 12.5 is the first set that was issued. They were using the wider perforation gauge at that time, 1938. But then later on into the 40s and sometimes even the 50s, they were issued at a whole bunch of other perforations. And originally I thought the later ones were the 14s, but they're all over the place in terms of what the perforations are. And the way Scott lists them vary. Sometimes they will say in the set header, the perforation is such and such. Sometimes they will give you perforations for individual items. Sometimes the major number is for the first issued stamp in the set. Sometimes it's for a later stamp in the set. So you can't rely on the major numbers as being the earliest set. And Gibbons is pretty much the same way. This is the one reference I have for Gibbons in this presentation. So if you're interested, as I am, in getting the 1940 sets, sets no later than 1940, you have to be very careful about what to use. So a number of my pages have minor numbers specified for the 1938 sets, because that's the way Scott has listed them. So here's some examples. Cape Verde 30A has no date. And by Scott's own rules, it's 1894, because that's the first date for the set. But number 30 itself is specified as 1895, which is after the set started. So it's one of these problems. And you have Denmark, Falkland Islands, and these Greenland. The Greenland is really an incredible mess. I won't even go into the details of this. Greenland originally, of course, in the older albums and the catalogs were just Q1 through 8, but then they had all these perforation varieties. And it's very mixed up now, what it is. Perforations, Sometimes a new version stamp is issued with only a perforation change, nothing else. Sometimes a new major number is issued, sometimes not. Why is this? Are this an error on the part of the catalog or whatever? So South Australia number 14 through 66. These varieties of perforations all have major numbers, but 81 through 93 are listed as perforated 11.5 to 12.5, not differentiated. And the perforation 10 varieties of those numbers are listed as minor numbers. Is this because the perforation machines were so inaccurate that they really had no control over what the perforations were? Were they issued first in one perforation and then another? You have no idea. They haven't specified this. Egypt is listed 12.5. The perforation varieties are listed as minor numbers within the major numbers. But under number 19 through 25, those are listed as one particular perforation, and then the other perforation are listed separately after them as minor numbers instead of interspersed with the major numbers. Again, there doesn't seem to be any firm rules to how they list this stuff. A number of stamps, they issue a whole variety of perforations, and they don't specify either major or minor numbers for what the different perforations are. I don't know why they did this, and what is there to be said about this? They have no clue as to why they're doing what they're doing. Again, was it a matter of the perforating machines were inaccurate, or they didn't care? And they didn't deliberately issue them one that way or the other, but there are quite a few of these listings of this sort. Watermarks. Generally, Scott is very interested in watermarks, and if they change the watermarks, you have a major number. The album pages always specified the watermark at the top of the page, and if it changed, they specified the new watermark. But Denmark, number 41 to 52 are watermark 112, but 141C to 152B, minor numbers are watermark 113. They didn't give major numbers to this changed watermark. Sometimes the watermark variety is listed in the set with a different watermark, and sometimes not. Falkland Islands and Gambia have major numbers for sideways watermarks. Gibbons lists a lot more varieties of sideways watermarks than Scott does, but for some reason Scott has done these two countries. There may be others. Obviously, I haven't gone through every single thing in the Scott catalog to figure out which ones they treat this way. Bavaria, you have the reverse case where a horizontal watermark is given in one set of major numbers, and a vertical, the same watermark vertical, is given another set of major numbers. Paper is generally a different kind of paper, has a different number, but Queensland 13 is called thick and yellowish, and 18, the exact same stamp, is said white wove, and there are quite a few varieties of this sort. Baden, same deal. Fiume 27 to 43 is on one type of paper, where there are other papers, and the other papers are all given minor numbers rather than major numbers. France, very similar, and Funchal, they've given a major number to number 10, which exists only on glazed paper, whereas all the other major numbers are a different kind of paper. Printing color, minor numbers generally have only slightly different colors from major numbers. So there's in the South Australia number 6 is blue, and 6D is ultramarine. However, sometimes slightly different colors have major numbers. So South Australia number 25 is lake brown, but the regular shade of brown is number 26. There are differences in designs, often result in new major numbers. And our old friend, the Washington Franklins of the U.S., exactly this type. There's no 2 cents red Washington. Washington. There's hundreds of them. So,
literally.
Yes, literally. There are these die things that are discussed in the introductory catalog for the British colonial issues, but they're not treated the same way. For example, Ceylon set number 200 to 247 is listed as being die 1, but the die 2 and the die 1 stamps are labeled as such as varieties. So what's going on there? This is crazy. Printing method almost always merits a new number. You change from engraved to lithographed, you get a new major number. The quality printing, we already mentioned the large Hermes heads, varnish bars from Austria, and overprints, a small difference in the type may or may not qualify for a major or minor number change. Sometimes Scott will just say, well, there are quite a few varieties in the typography of this overprint, and won't list them separately at all. EFOs are another thing I haven't mentioned at this point. EFOs are almost always, if they're mentioned at all, are footnotes. They don't list separate numbers and so on. I haven't looked at the Scott Specialized US. Do they give numbers to errors and freaks and oddities or not?
Not that I recall. There may be some certain, I think there are certain ones like major types, but not like, misperfs usually or anything like that. They have a separate catalog for that, I think.
Inverted
The
Jenny.
inverted
gets a
Jenny,
number,
yes,
and it's just an
C3A.
error.
That's an error. That's an error, see?
Yeah.
Right.
What,
EFO is errors, freaks, and oddities.
Errors, they do list some, but not all of them.
Major ones that are like super valuable, kind of rare.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the King George VI sets are a real problem for me because the 1938 numbers are not all major numbers, so I list the minor numbers. There are some cases where the 1940 border is not involved. When I remake my pages, I put them in chronological order, so a set may be broken up into several different locations based on the date. So in some cases, I have listed the minor number because it's the earlier version of that set, an item. And sometimes I've not done that consistently myself because I wasn't aware of the problem initially. But sometimes, usually I will mount a variety in a frame for a major number if I don't have the major number itself. And sometimes even if it was either more or less expensive than the original major number. So renumbering. Scott does not normally renumber stamps. I suspect they do this because all the dealers have labeled all their stock with a particular number, and it's a real pain in the butt to change them. And also, like myself, they're collectors who keep inventories, and they don't want to have to go in and try to figure out what the new number should be. However,
They have done it.
one of the most obvious ones is that within the last 10 years, they have redone all the Portugal and colonies series monocolor issue sets, and they have renumbered them. It's very interesting. In the 1969 catalog, it's the first Scott catalog I have, the Portuguese series sets, they were just said, oh, it's the perfect 11 and 12 by 11 and a half or 15 by 14. And that's all they said. And then they listed the denominations and colors. Later on, they separated the varieties and giving many of them minor numbers. And then more recently, they've in fact renumbered the set. And they've broken it down, the 12 by 11 and a half chalky paper, then the 15 by 14, then the 12 by 11 and a half ordinary paper. And then at that point, they ran out of regular major numbers and they started using this uppercase suffix for the higher values. And then the glazed paper varieties continuing this use of uppercase suffixes all the way to 298U. So all of the Portuguese series monocolors, everybody was forced to change all of their inventories and I had to redo some of the pages and so on. That was a real butt. So you can understand why they don't want to do that.
Another major example of that is the listings for what they call Turkey in Asia.
Okay.
Anatolia, in other words. They completely renumbered them. This was some years back.
Okay, conclusion. It's a mess for those who are order seekers, which is quite a few stamp collectors who are very interested in getting things in an orderly fashion. It's likely that the reason all of these problems appear is that in the earlier phases, they didn't have written rules about how to assign numbers along with other things. And possibly also that different people were doing the cataloging at different times for different countries, and they made their own decisions as about how this should be broken down. The problems, the worst problems really are in the early issues, which I think indicates that they didn't have it well organized at the time they started issuing catalog numbers. Given the issues we just discussed around renumbering, I think it's very unlikely that Scott will ever fix any of these things in a systematic manner. They may do things like they did with Portugal, where they decide, oh, these were deliberately issued in a different perforation or using different papers. We really have to distinguish between them, so they'll renumber them. But I think on the whole, Scott will be completely uninterested in fixing these problems. And of course, that again, I'm mentioning other catalogs. Each catalog, I'm sure, does it somewhat differently. So there's complete chaos in this world of major and minor numbers.
It seems that when a nation issues occupation issues, sometimes they are included with the occupied area, and sometimes they are included with the occupying power.
I was just going to mention that.
Oh yeah.
I'm still working on my lecture series on Greek stamps.
Yes.
And I'm not going to present it until I'm done, and I'm sure that I have everything in order, because I confess to being one of those obsessives like Phil. But I've noticed that too. For example, when Germany occupied Belgium, the occupation stamps are listed under Belgium, right? They're German stamps with Belgium, Belgian overprint. Whereas when Greece occupied Albania in World War II, the listings are under Greece, not Albania.
And
And there are many other examples you could list. There's no consistency. It's where the stamps were used that is supposed to determine, at least according to what I think is the most sensible way.
There's another country that's Mesopotamia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mesopotamia really should be listed as not Turkey, but the way Scott lists everything for the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. It should be listed as Ottoman Empire under British occupation, but they listed it as a separate country, which is.
You know, the history of these things is important. And once something gets into the catalog, it stays there.